Adult psychiatrists urge your states to allow trans youth to play sport. And this is, of course, a continuation of stories we have been covering for a while now, in which there are currently hundreds of bills going through at the moment at state level, which are targeting queer people. A lot of them, I think half of them, sorry, I'm very gassy. Half of them are targeting trans people, and a large number of those are targeting, in particular, trans youth. And a big part of the issue when it comes to trans youth is, of course, sports. Namely, the idea that trans women have an unfair, dominating advantage over cis women, and they'll just destroy women's sports if we don't act quickly. And this has resulted in a number of different people from different professions. The science is unanimous. It's absolute fucking bullshit. There is no correlation between testosterone and performance. Trans people with the gender they say they are, they should be able to play. It is a violation of not just trans rights, but the rights of intersex and cis women to put them through very invasive testing, etc. And I just wanted to offer another perspective, which came out in the Scientific American on the 16th of March, and that is the perspective of child psychiatrist, Train says hi, child psychiatrist Jack Turban. They put out a piece titled Trans Girls Belong in Girls' Sports Teams, and the article is a response to this ongoing onslaught of anti-trans bills seen across the US, many targeting trans youth in sport. Some of the bills are incredibly cruel. For example, there is one bill which would permit students to challenge the gender of their peers, and the way that is resolved in the bill, the bill mentions itself, the way that is resolved is by performing a genital exam. So any student can challenge the sex of any other student in sport, and that results in that child being sexually assaulted. Then there was another bill, which I think we covered last time, which criminalizes playing on the sports team and using the opposite using the correct changing rooms for your gender. I do apologize. I am very exhausted, and that actually could potentially carry with it prison time in juvie. So, you know, there are a lot of bills targeting trans people right now. It is absolutely a horror to be a trans person in the US. There are hundreds of them, literally hundreds, that are being tracked by various human rights organizations. And it's just a big part of the mess of the current trans hysteria, which is like we've covered in regards to all this. Before I continue with the article, however, I just want to note something that I've been meaning to note for a while, but I just haven't had really the opportunity. I always forget it, we're too busy, moving on, whatever. And that's the fact that, as a lot of you probably know, in 2019 I dealt with a transphobe, Stephen Woodford, of Rationality Rules, and a large portion of the secular community rallied behind him, sadly. Stephen Woodford presented trans women in sports as a threat that needed to be dealt with. He painted, like, specifically black trans girls as a danger to white cis women, painting targets on the backs of two of said black trans girls. It really is the whole shit show. And I just want to note that the people who defended Stephen Woodford, so Jimmy Snow of Dear Mr. Atheist, Shannon Q, Surus, all of these people, Han Ra, who defended Stephen Woodford in all this, you are directly responsible for these bills. In part, you have the blood on your hands. You laid the foundation. You defended the rhetoric and deemed it off limits, not transphobia, when it comes to the bills that will potentially allow for a student to accuse another student and that student be sexually assaulted to prove their sex. You are partly responsible for the bills that potentially will put trans people in juvie if they play as their gender. I just want to make that absolutely clear.
I want to make absolutely clear, Rachel Oates, supposed feminist, you had a hand in a bill which will mean that potentially hundreds of girls, like, I'm pretty sure the bill went to like as young as pre-primary, like the bottom of grade school.
I don't know, and frankly, either way, it's just absolutely horrific. But
supposed feminist Rachel Oates, you are partly responsible for potentially hundreds of girls being sexually assaulted.
I warned all these people that this would happen. I told them it would happen, and it has fucking happened. And it's not just these bills either. The consultation in the UK about gender-neutral toilets and trans-inclusive toilets, you are also responsible for that as well. Because as I noted in my video, it doesn't matter whether you pick bathrooms, sports, refuges, whatever. When you paint trans women as a threat, that just feeds into the same general reservoir which cultivated the current trans hysteria that has resulted in this consultation. It is all linked. You don't get to say, I agree with this form of transphobia, but not this form of transphobia. You don't get to play that game.
Even without a reservoir, a pre-existing reservoir, it goes back to this thing of none of this is convenient. It's not going to stay compartmentable because it's convenient. Yeah. If you go point to a group of people and say, those people are a grave threat and they will hurt you. People are not thinking about this rationally. They're not going to be like, oh, okay, there's a problem in sport. There's a threat in sport, but bathrooms are just fine. But refuges are just fine. But, hospitals are just fine. That's not how it works. If you go, these people are a threat and need to be dealt with, people are going to respond thinking these people are a threat and need to be dealt with. Who'd have thunk it?
And in response to Jimmy Snow in particular, because Jimmy, I think you mentioned Rachel Oates did the same. Jimmy was like, oh, I'm so sure that rationality rules. Stephen Woodford is not a transphobe. That if trans people ever came under attack, he would ride out there on a white horse with a flaming sword. Fuck off. Like, before 2019, I had been covering the trans hysteria in the UK since 2016. I have a fucking presentation from 2017 called Imported Hate as part of my hate crime module in the UK as part of a hate crime module. Okay? Discussing this, marking how it's moved from places like Houston, Texas, the Houston Hero Bill, all of that. I tracked how the arguments, which, yeah, they had a presence here in the UK, but they kind of died down, and how it was all being reignited by this imported American rhetoric. I tracked that since 2016. Rationality rules didn't speak up then. He sure as hell hasn't spoken up now. It's kind of like he's an alt-right grifty dipshit.
Rachel Oates did do the same thing, absolutely. That was her her principal argument was, Stephen Woodford is a lovely guy and he cares so much about people and he would never, and the moment trans people are actually being hurt, he's going to speak out against it because that's who he is, and completely missing the point that trans people were already being hurt. Yeah. Look, they're being hurt even more. Rachel Oates hasn't said a fucking word.
All she's done is promote the career abuser of trans people, Rose of Dawn. Anyway, so yes, that's something that I've been wanting to say for a long while on this topic. We never had the time, so I was just like, no, just take the time. I'm sure someone's going to have very choice words about that section later on. Anyway, returning to the article, however, Turban discusses the lack of scientific support for the bills, dealing with an array of common arguments. In one part, the article states, quote, in describing the Connecticut case in the Wall Street Journal, opinion writer Abigail Shrier, I'm sure many of us know her, expressed a representative argument. When transgender girls compete on girls' sport teams, she wrote, cisgender girls can't win. The opinion piece left out the fact that 2 days after the Connecticut lawsuit was filed by the cisgender girls' families, one of those girls beat one of the transgender girls named in the lawsuit in a Connecticut state championship. It turns out that when transgender girls play on girls' sports teams, cisgender girls can win. In fact, the vast majority of female athletes are cisgender, as are the vast majority of winners. There is no epidemic of transgender girls dominating female sports. End quote. They also added, quote, an estimated 10% of women have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which results in elevated testosterone levels. They're not banned from female sports. Transgender girls on puberty blockers, on the other hand, have negligible testosterone levels, yet these state bills would force them to play with the boys. End quote. On top of this, quote, and this is the last one in this section, quote, Katrina Kokansis, a senior visiting fellow and expert on testosterone and bioethics at I'm sorry, let me just restart that again. Quote, Katrina Kokansis, a senior visiting fellow and expert on testosterone and bioethics at Yale University, explains, quote, studies of testosterone levels in athletes do not show any clear, consistent relationship between testosterone and athletic performance. Sometimes testosterone is associated with better performance, but other studies show weak links or no links. And yet, others show testosterone is associated with worse performance. End quote, end quote. So again, the article goes through some of the common arguments, points out it's all bullshit. Cis girls are still winning against trans athletes. Many cis women have high levels of testosterone, but we don't ban them, so why are we punishing trans girls for the same? On top of this, the whole idea that testosterone is this wonder drug is pseudoscience. And you might go, well, Ethel, what about all the people that are like involved in doping and like taking extra testosterone and all this? And it's like, these are the same people who buy Brain Force because they think it makes them smarter. Just because a lot of people hold a pseudoscientific belief does not suddenly make it valid. It really is amazing to see how supposed skeptics fall for this time and time again. Oh, well, I was given this really poor general understanding as a child, and science never changes, it never advances, it never learns more, so I must be right. And it just all falls apart. This is why back in 2019, Stephen Woodford, he went for hemoglobin, stating that hemoglobin doesn't change when the person goes on HRT. Hemoglobin changes when someone goes on HRT. Oh, well, it's I think it was muscle mass next. The range for muscle mass is, for a trans woman is much larger than that for cis women. It's actually, the upper range is about the same. There's a few anomalies, which there will be anomalies in cis women. This is a relatively small sample, but in general, the range is peaked off about the same. Lung size, heart size, and twitch muscle type fiber. The 3 studies you linked, none of them even mentioned that. And that's why it's this continuous pseudoscience being propagated.
But don't you see, Ethel? The Y chromosome is smaller and therefore lighter than an X chromosome. So the fact that they have one X,
but that would make them weaker,
Y.
Levi. That would make them weaker in like wrestling. You can't do that.
But it would make them faster in like track running. Therefore, they have an advantage in all sports.
Yeah. That's another thing. Like different sports deals with different like body types, and like certain sports you have mixed body types as well, like team sports. I'm
gonna say it. I'm calling it now. I will bet 100 actual useless dollars that by the year 2025, they're seriously going to be saying trans women have an advantage because Y chromosomes are lighter, despite the fact that some trans women don't have Y chromosomes.
Anyway, Turban also pointed out the role transphobia has on trans people and the opportunities and their abilities, stating that, quote, claiming that transgender girls have an unfair advantage in sports also neglects the fact that these kids have the deck stacked against them in nearly every other way imaginable. They suffer from high rates of bullying, anxiety, depression, all of which make it more difficult for them to train and compete. They also have higher rates of homelessness and poverty because of common experiences of family rejection. This is likely a major driver of why we see so few transgender athletes in collegiate sports, collegiate sports, and none in the Olympics. End quote. So again, there is a big factor involved, which everyone seems to fucking ignore, in how trans people are already fighting the system in being trans. That is just all ignored, and they're presented as having this wonderful advantage over cis women in every single way. It's like, that is just not the fucking case, okay? And it's also worse when it comes to, again, in his original video, Stephen Woodford painted targets on the backs of two trans girls, specifically black trans girls. So not only are they dealing with the fucking transphobia, but they're dealing with the racism. And because a girl who came 8th, by the way, not 3rd, not 4th, 8th, because she feels like she was cheated out of her places, this white upper class one who can go to court and has money to throw at them, because she felt cheated, every trans person has to suffer. By the way, the thing that I really love about that case that Woodford brought up is the fact that even if the two trans girls who competed and won hadn't won, hadn't competed, it wouldn't mean she would have been 6th. Odds are she still would have been 8th. Why? Because it was a competition in which every college, I think, put forward 1 or 2 members. So if the two trans girls hadn't competed, they would have been replaced by 2 cis girls from those schools. And again, she came 8th. So it's like, you're not as good as you think you are. But like, what also really shows the absurdity of this idea of, that like cis boys are gonna pretend to be girls. First of all, have you ever met cis boys? Have you met their fragile masculinity? Okay? Oh my god. Mansplaining, okay? If mansplaining exists, they are not going to pretend to be girls. Because even if they beat all the girls, their ego isn't going to let them feel like they've actually won anything. Because that is how shitty cis men are. But here's the thing.
We talked about this. We talked about an actual case of a man competing with women, not a boy, but like a man competing with women. And he came 2nd place. Mm-hmm. And I even went into the whole thing about how they're not, the reason why men don't bother is because they think so little of women, it would be a hollow victory.
Yeah, but here's the thing. What's also interesting is the specific case I'm mentioning where the cis girl came 8th and she took it to court. That was an open race. And what that means is these people aren't tested for anything. And these girls could have not been on HRT. They didn't have to take HRT to play. It was an open track. They could play even if they decided, you know what, medical transition, not for me. And that would have been fair. That would have been their place. That was the, I've forgotten what it's called, where it's like the division. That was the division these girls chose to play in, was the open track. But both of them were on HRT. Think about that. They didn't have to be on HRT. They were on HRT. It's almost like these trans girls are girls who want to feel their full girlness, if you will, like deal with their body dysphoria, and they just want to play sport. They're not gaming the system. They're not trying to gain every advantage they could. They're just two innocent black girls who just want to play sport. So fucking let them play sport and stop being a racist, transphobic prick.
It's literally the exact same thing as trans boys, right? The argument from transphobes is, of course, that anyone who's biologically female is not only going to be at a disadvantage against boys, but is going to be in danger. And yet, trans boys desperately want to play against.
We'll come back to
boys.
this in a second, actually.
I was just going to say, because it's really uncomfortable being in a group of people who are the wrong gender. It's really comfortable being misgendered and stuff. When I was in school, when I was in school, we used to have one sport class every week, a short one that was mixed, and then a longer one that was segregated. And then the last year I had to do sport in school, they changed it and it was just segregated classes. And it was so, for me, the dysphoria was so bad. I broke down in the middle of sport class and I had to leave so I could ask them to change me to one of the few mixed classes that were left. And I ended up playing volleyball for the rest of the year because that was literally the only thing that was on offer. This dysphoria is really bad. That's why they do it.
Yeah.
It's because it fucking hurts when you are in the wrong division, when you're being treated as the wrong gender. It's not a trick. They just want to play sport and not be so uncomfortable that if you're anything like me, you fucking break down and can't do it.
And this is kind of what Turban leads into after he goes over the basic arguments that just don't have any merit. Turban, as a child psychiatrist, goes in to explore the psychological effects this is going to have on all the children involved. Like in the opening, they say that, quote, "They're unscientific and they would cause serious mental health damage to both cisgender and transgender youth," end quote. Again, like bills where a student can accuse another student of being the opposite gender, resulting in sexual assault. How can you not see the damage of that? They also go on to add that, quote, "Beyond the trauma of sex verification exams, these bills would cause further emotional damage to transgender youth. While we haven't seen an epidemic of transgender girls dominating sports leagues, we have seen high rates of anxiety and depression and suicide attempts. Research highlights that a major driver of these mental health problems is rejection of someone's gender identity. Forcing trans youth to play on sports teams that don't match their identity will worsen these disparities. It's a classic form of transgender conversion therapy, a discredited practice of trying to force transgender people to be cisgender and gender conforming," end quote. Now, as if by like some transgender spirit out there, on the 25th of March, former wrestler Mac Beggs opened up on Yahoo News about the impact of being forced to play on the women's team and what that did to his mental health, noting that it left him, quote, "in a very dark place," end quote, and that he was still recovering years later. Now, you might think, well, who is Mac Beggs? Mac Beggs is actually someone most of you have probably seen, but just don't know the name of. Mac Beggs he's a trans man. He's a wrestler, or was a wrestler. He's now a former wrestler, because I think he hung it up after all the shit he received. He was forced to play in the women's division. They would not let him play in the men's division, which is what he was pushing for. If you've ever seen videos of trans women in, women's sports, and it shows a wrestler, a male wrestler, choking a cis woman, what's implied is that that male wrestler is actually a trans woman. It's not. It's Mac Beggs. Mac Beggs. It is Mac Beggs. It's a trans man. He is someone that wanted to play in the men's league, and they just flat out refused. And it caused him severe mental anguish, completely verifying what was being said in this article by Turban. So, you know, it really does go to show that this whole argument of, oh, well, we just need to, you know, protect the cis girls. And don't you notice how no trans men want to compete in male league? That is complete bullshit. The reason nobody hears this is because they want to keep it quiet. The fact that trans men are pushing to compete in male leagues, and some of them even dominating when they can, that challenges the narrative. That scares them. So they suppress it. They instead pretend like the trans man is actually a trans woman, and look at how he's choking her in wrestling, where it's an absolute legal move to do a headlock. It's designed to conjure the idea of trans women as being dangerous by lying about this person who is a trans man. And again, yeah, like it feeds into what you said about your own experience, Levi, here, and how it had.
Oh, I actually remembered something else.
Go on.
But once I was invited to play rugby, not in like any class or anything, just out during recess or whatever. And the way they would do it is the boys would play tackle, and the girls would play touch, and the boys, of course, would like just do the touch, not the tackle. And even though I knew it was probably dangerous, I pretty much begged to play tackle. And I was seriously prepared to be injured rather than have to deal with the dysphoria of being treated like a girl. Like that is the level of dysphoria we're talking about.
Yeah. And again, like
dysphoria. This was of course pre-T as well. Like I struggled horribly in sports, even against girls. I'm just not athletic naturally, between my foot problems and my lack of stamina and the exercise-induced asthma that for some reason they cannot diagnose but is definitely there. Like I struggle to even play against girls, but I would rather play against boys and just have no chance in hell than play against girls and barely be able to keep up, because the dysphoria was that bad.
I mean, the thing is, like, we have small people in rugby as well. Like, I know back in my school when we played rugby, there was a couple of really small guys. But the thing is, like, you put them in different places on the field because they have different uses. Like, I was not a big person. I'm tall, but I'm not a big person. But
nice.
They knew I'm very good at running because I have very fucking long legs. I'm also very good at sudden stopping, which is great when some prick decides to try dive tackle me. I just suddenly stop and they dive tackle the dirt. God, I fucking hate Scott. Just remembered one specific individual who kept trying to dive tackle me, being thinking he was fucking American prick, and it's like, nope, we're playing rugby. I'm just gonna stop. I could also do the iron lock very well. I was very determined. Once I got hold of someone, I was not letting go. So.
Oh, that feeds back into our discussion earlier.
About what? I am lost. Okay, I get it. All the inside
You had your
jokes.
chance to fly away.
Anyway, the last thing Turban added was to discuss what children are actually worried about, because a lot of the fears around trans girls in sports come from the parents. They don't come from the fucking children. The only child I know who's actually fucking upset about this is that brat who came 8th and decided the good sportsmanship was to throw the fucking lawyers at the 2 black trans girls on the team. Like, that's the only one I can think of who's like upset, and she can fuck off for all I care. That is such class privilege there, the whole idea of I lost a sporting event, so I'm going to throw my lawyers at them. Save the money that you use on the lawyers. Yeah. Anyway, as they went on to add, quote, as a child psychiatry fellow, I spend a lot of time with kids. They have many worries on their minds. Bullying, sexual assault, divorcing parents, concerns they won't get into college. What they're not worried about is transgender girls playing on girl sports teams, end quote. So, really, in the same way that, like, the Graham Linehans of the world try to talk for women, If transphobic shits could just stop trying to talk for children and like make an issue where there is none, that would be great. It's like,
Transphobic chicks are never going to stop trying to talk for children because they are very much of the children are property camp.
yep, in every aspect. Okay, so I do believe.
Even if the thing about trans girls having an advantage were true, there were 6 spots and 2 trans girls. There are bigger battles to fight in the world. I mean, in that one particular race, of course, not the specific thing we're talking about now.
Yeah.
Just,
It-
I do just sit back and think about that, and like, even if it were true, the number of times there's even a trans person in the league in the first place is so few and far between.
And it was a miracle that there were fucking 2 of them there.
Yeah.